What's going on, guys? Today we are revisiting an old project. So this has been off the channel for about a year. Within that year, I was rebuilding or mechanically restoring the Land Cruiser and working on the Tacoma here and there. But the Land Cruiser was really taking a lot of my time and energy, and I did not want to keep working on this in between without being fully focused on the build. So that's why it hasn't been on the channel. I was accruing parts over the year. I got some really big key components that we'll go over in a minute, but I've been working on this since 2019. It's been a very slow process. The motor is completely gone through. Every single seal is brand new. Every bolt is polished. It's got some upgrades here and there as far as the piston, the head, and we've got long travel arms, wheels, tires, so it's almost there. The plastics we will be changing later, but that's just something I'm going to worry about at the end. The most nerve-wracking thing for me is going to be the test fire. I've built motors before for cars, but I don't know, it's just something about this restoration that's been kind of just messing with me a little bit. But either way, let's get some of the junk off of this thing and see where we left off. And here's the quick pile of parts that I put together. We're going to go over these in just a second, but if you were following the build before, you'll notice that we're on a fresh set of rubber. Those are going to be Skat tracks, front and rear, with the edge-to-edge buff. I waited about 4 months for these things to get assembled, and we did it with 7 paddles because it's a 2-stroke. So I'll post the specs on the actual tires in the description, just in case you want to reference them, and I'll actually put the specs for the wheels as well. But I just want to go over something that we did off camera, and this was over the course of the year. So I picked up a secondary radiator. This radiator actually runs after the main radiator. So instead of that lower hose going to the motor, it goes to this radiator, passes through again, gets cooled again, and that lower hose goes to the motor. So this is a really cool setup. I totally love the way it looks. I think it looks pretty epic, and it's going to help in the dunes because this is being built for the dunes. So it's going to be pretty demanding on the motor. But other than that, let's get over to this pile of parts. So we already talked about the tires. This is the wheel from the last video. So I haven't even gotten those all mounted up yet. Those bolts are actually just finger tight. And we actually left off with me getting those Yamaha hubs to fit the factory axle. So this is where things changed in my build thought process for this bike. And it's going to be with the overall stance. So when you're looking at this thing from the front, you can see the track width is way wider than the rear. Put this on the ground with its own weight and the arms flatten out, and this thing gets pushed out even more. It looked way too crazy. I was going to run with it at first with the stock axle, but I just couldn't do it. It looked weird. I know it was going to ride weird, and I didn't want to put myself in that situation, especially when cornering. So I went and I picked up an axle from HSD Racing. That is a Durablue extended axle, and they call it a 2+4. So this spacer can be moved. There's actually 2 spacers, and you can make it +2 inches or +4 inches overall compared to stock. So all that requires is just taking the axle nut off, changing the spacers around, and you can do it on the fly. You don't need any crazy press or anything. You could do it out on the field. So I'm going to run it +4. I think that's going to be a perfect square setup. From everything I've read, it's better to have it a little bit narrower in the rear. So we'll experiment with the +2, +4, but having the adjustability there is more peace of mind for me. With that being said, this is a 26 spline axle. That axle is 24 spline. The 87s were a weird year, and this was an early 87 that got the 85-86 24 spline axle. So unfortunately, the hubs that we put in on the last video can't be used, but maybe I could sell that axle and the hubs to someone that needs it. But we've got this 26 spline. It's way beefier, so we had to get hubs to fit. We've got another hose to try to figure out that whole double radiator solution. And this is going to have all the seals and bearings to replace. So here's the bearings to replace when you take the axle out. So those are going to be all the seals and the bearings for the carrier. We just have to disassemble all this stuff, get it out of the swing arm, and do some press work. Other than that, we're getting down to the final bits of firing this motor up. Right now I'm having a problem where the head is contacting the pipe. Let me see if I could swing around and show you on this side. It's really, really tight quarters. So you can see right there, the head is actually resting on the pipe. So this pipe is an FMF fatty for an 87. The cool head is just way larger than stock. So I don't think they were ever designed to be ran with one another. But I'm going to try to do a few tricks here and there. I'll post what I was successful with after, but I've got a few ideas for that. Anyways, yeah, once that's settled, I've got some OEM replacement parts up here. And these are going to be all of the carb hoses. I was going to get some blue ones, but I ended up just going with original Suzuki parts. So these are all the carb venting hoses and drain hoses for the factory carb. And I went ahead and got OEM ball joints. So Full Flight designs their arms off of factory style joints, but I didn't want to run the ones that it came with, so I ended up just getting factory, and we'll keep those Full Flight joints for spares. Other than that, we've got washers and axle nuts for the larger axle because it's bigger. The thread pitch isn't the same, so just a few more parts to address, but nothing major. And the final two bits on the floor is going to be the fiberglass packing. I know that that FMF pipe hasn't been serviced in my ownership, and that's been since 2005. So it is probably destroyed in there, but we're going to get that swapped out and get two of these full floater stickers put onto the swing arm. So my plan right now is just to get the tires mounted onto the wheels. That way we have a few less things floating around on the ground. We'll get the beadlocks bolted up, torqued to spec, fill it with some air, and get the bead set on the inside. And then probably tackle the full floater stickers and the exhaust packing and just see where we go from there. Maybe we'll end the video there. If not, we'll keep moving forward. But those are going to be the first three things we tackle. All right, I already got this one dropped in, but mounting a beadlock is really easy. Once you take off the beadlock ring on the face, the diameter of the top is always narrower than the bottom because the beadlock ring is going to pinch it. You don't need a tire machine to roll it over the bead. So you can most of the time just get this on by hand. Sometimes you need some spray. This one I was able to just drop on and push down by hand, which I'll show you the process on the front wheel. But from there, you just grab your beadlock ring, and I like to orientate it with a uniform style on all of them. So you've got the OMF logo engraved, and then you have the OMF gel sticker. I like the gel sticker down with the valve stem just so that they all look the same. Obviously none of this matters, but it's just personal preference. And from here you just squish it down and get a few started. I always do it by hand, that way you don't risk any cross threading. Right, with that, you could pretty much get the rest down by hand, give or take. Some of them will give you a hard time. And we'll show you how to do the front. So same as the rear, you're gonna drop the tire in from the top. Since this one is non-directional, it doesn't matter which side we go from, but you pretty much just start kind of at a lower end and then just wedge it forward. Okay, so we're past that. I'll line up the bead lock ring like I did on all the other 4 wheels, and we'll get it started by hand. Real quick before we go any further, I just realized that you're supposed to put on some anti-seize on all of the bolts. So I'm just going to time lapse, taking off all the bolts, putting a little bit of anti-seize on it, and then I'll gun them down just a little bit till they snug up, and we'll get to torquing everything. Time to air these things up, and we'll be using the onboard air compressor on the Tacoma. If you haven't checked out that video, I do have a walk around on the page, but it's a pretty sweet little setup for off-roading. Anyways, we're going to air these up to about 8 psi. I'm just going to leave it at that since we're not riding anytime soon, and then we could adjust from there depending on how it rides out in the sand. But for now, let's get them filled up and let's get these inner beads popped on all 4 wheels. All right, it's at 14 psi. We're gonna drop it back down to 8. We're at 18 psi and no bead has popped yet. There we go, 21 psi. We're at 21, it still hasn't gone yet. Woo! That one took 27. All right guys, well that trusty little setup worked. It always fills up the tires on the truck, so I had no doubt that it would handle these without issue. But anyways, we got them up to about 27 was the highest, and then deflated them back down to 8 psi. So now these are fully mounted and ready to go, and we could start working on the quad itself to get that thing finished up. I'm not sure if this is gonna work, but I put a pry bar through one of the holes on the rotor, and we're gonna see if that'll hold the carrier enough for me to push forward on a wrench. Obviously this is on a jack, so it might wanna move, but I'm gonna try to just kind of like impact it a little bit. And this is gonna be a Baco 9035R. I'll link it in the description. It's the only one that I found that was big enough. Anyways, let's see if this works. Get some gloves because this was hurting my hand when I was hitting it. Yes. There we go. The reason I'm doing this side is because the axle goes out that way. So there's no point in wasting any time because I've got a caliper mounting billet piece on the new axle. So we could just take this off on this side and pull this to the side in case anyone else needs it. So I can see here there's some red Loctite that was holding that in. Now we're gonna have another bolt to break away, or a nut. That one wasn't too bad. The reason I'm doing it right here in this weird angle is because it was going forward. I wanted that force to go down right here instead of trying to go forward and pushing the whole bike on the jack stand. All right, so we got those two free. There's two large washers here. I'm just gonna put it all in order. And this is going to be the sprocket holder, OEM sprocket holder. Right here you got your dust seal. There's going to be a wheel bearing behind that, a center spacer, a wheel bearing, and another, or axle bearing, and another seal. But we should be able to pull this out. Oh, I forgot. This thing has the rotor, and I haven't removed it yet because I wasn't going to take this off. So let's take off the lower skid since it needs to get refinished anyways. All right, let's get this axle out. You can do this disassembly on a vise. I'm just gonna do a little bit more on the bike since we're here and see if I could just get this to pop out. That's weird. There we go. All right, so we got the seal off on this side. I'm just using a pry bar, getting right under it. This side's off now. And we're gonna tap out the bearing with the punch. That was really easy. So in between the two bearings, you've got a spacer. This is absolutely crucial to putting back when you put the new bearings in. And we'll hop onto the other side. If you don't know where I'm tapping, I'm actually tapping with the punch right on the inner race. And you're going to want to do top and bottom. You don't ever want to get it crooked. All right, that is two bearings removed. These are still spinning and they still have grease in them, which is actually really good. Okay, so let's get this stuff installed. This is the part number for the OEM bearing and the OEM seal. I bought these off Motorsport. I don't recommend doing all this work and cheaping out on some bearings, so get the good stuff if you can. This is going to be the factory axle seal that I pulled out, and I did notice that it came out in two pieces, so you can see that crack right here. So this dirty side was facing out, and there's actually a lip that sticks out. So I know for sure that was the outside, and the clean side was in. So be sure that you look at your seal when you put it in. You want that lip sticking out on both sides. And you can also tell this is one solid piece with kind of like a cup shape going forward, and the smaller piece goes in that cup shape, and that goes outside just like that. And there's a lip on the inside of this carrier that is going to allow you to bottom out the bearing. You don't have to worry about the depth that you're putting it in. It bottoms out by itself, and then the seal goes after. So I have a nice plate that's larger than the bearing, and it'll distribute the load across both races. All right, so it is not fully seated, and we're gonna use the old race to do that. Actually, let's do this. You hear that different sound? That tink, that means that it's fully seated on the inside. There you go. Time to press in the new bearing seal. And we're gonna put just a tiny bit of grease on this. Sure that it is a white lithium-based grease, not petroleum. So I'm using some Superlube O-ring grease, and it's just gonna be a skim coat all the way around. I'll actually wipe some off with the rag just to be sure it's not too thick. Oh, this is actually pressing in by hand pretty easily. And just like the bearing, you can use an old seal to tap it into wherever you want. And you could feel the lip just to make sure it's even all the way around. This one, I don't think you need it all the way butted up against the bearing, but we'll leave a nice even seal so that the axle could ride perfect. Okay, so we got a little bit of a problem on this side, and that is that the new bearing is actually dropping into this way too easy. And what that's going to do is allow for the race to slip around and destroy the carrier, destroy the bearing, because it's not fully seated. So I don't really have any other option here but to use some of this thread locker, which I'll show you right now. So it's going to be a Loctite 603. It is made specifically for this problem. I actually used it in some of the questionable bearings inside the motor when I rebuilt it, because those cases get soft over time. So we're going to go ahead and lather this thing up. And it won't make it impossible to take parts out in the future, but it's going to definitely help prevent a failure for the carrier, and who knows what other carnage it could possibly cause. So yeah, that's a little strange, but there was no damage before on the old bearings. I don't see anything all burnt up, so we'll just run it and see what happens. All right, that is the bearings and the seals replaced. Okay, we're going to go ahead and slide in the new axle. Careful with the seals. You don't want to damage those. From here, you could take some wood and just tap the shaft. Doesn't take much. This side is going to take the factory sprocket holder. A locking nut, and a circlip to hold that. We'll deal with this one later. This is the posi lock nut, but for now I just want to make sure that everything is looking good. We could also actually get the sprocket too while we're at it. Okay, that wraps up this job, guys. So we're gonna call it a wrap on this video. We did quite a bit for breaking an old project back out and getting it some new life. I needed this motivation. I needed to kind of get a momentum to finish up this project, and I feel like I got it. I'm ready to keep going, and we're one step further to get it fired up and riding out in the dunes.